For weeks, the West and the US have been warning Russia of severe sanctions that would hit its economy hard. And as the Russian forces continue to march into Ukraine, the West started unveiling sanctions against Moscow, including financial ones. The European Union, the US, the UK, along with allies, agreed to exclude a number of Russian banks from SWIFT. The move aims to hit the country's banking network and its access to funds via SWIFT. What exactly is SWIFT? It is an international payment system used by thousands of financial institutions to allow smooth and rapid transfer of money across borders. It is pivotal for the smooth transaction of money. SWIFT stands for Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Created in 1973 and based in Belgium, SWIFT links 11,000 banks and institutions in over 200 countries. SWIFT, however, is not a traditional high street bank. It is an instant messaging system that informs users when the payments have been sent and arrived. SWIFT sends more than 40 million messages a day as trillions of dollars change hands between companies and governments. More than 1% of those messages are thought to involve Russian payments. SWIFT helps make secure international trade possible for its members. Ideally, it is not supposed to take sides when it comes to disputes. SWIFT says it does not have any decision to impose sanctions and that it rests with the governments. In 2012, Iran was banned from SWIFT as a part of sanctions over its nuclear program. Iran lost almost half of its oil export revenues and 30% foreign trade. So will banning Russia from SWIFT impact it? The West is yet to announce which Russian banks will be removed from SWIFT, but the European Union, the US, as well as UK had said that the move would ensure that these banks are disconnected from international financing systems and harm their ability to operate globally. The West essentially aims to cut off Russian companies from smooth and instant financial transactions for its energy and agricultural products. Banks would then have to deal directly with each other, adding delays and extra costs, which would ultimately cut off revenue for the Russian government. In 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, Moscow was threatened with a swift expulsion. Russia warned that the move would be tantamount to declaration of war. While the West did not go ahead with a swift expulsion in 2014, the threat prompted Russia to develop its own cross-border transfer system. Russia prepared a national payment card system known as MIR to process card payments. However, only a few countries currently use it. Russian banks could also route payments via countries that have not imposed sanctions, like China, which has its own payment system. Moscow's expulsion from SWIFT has divided the Western allies. The risk of chaos is too large. Germany, France, Italy have been reluctant to take such a move. To take such an action. Cutting Russia off SWIFT would also impact the finances of some European countries. The European Union is heavily reliant on Russia for oil and natural gas imports. And finding alternative supplies will not be easy. With energy prices already soaring, further disruption is something that many European governments want to avoid at this point. Let's bring in our panelists with us on the broadcast this minute. Dr. Kari Otherman, who is a political commentator and senior policy analyst at the European Policy Center. Amanda Paul from Brussels. Amanda, let me come to you first. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said that the EU and other Western powers are aiming to cripple the Russian president's war machine. But what is your assessment of the sanctions so far? Are they enough?
It's crucially important that Russia is isolated from the world economy. The sanctions that have been put on already are a good start, but they're not enough. It's really important that the SWIFT sanctions, Russia being cut out of SWIFT, happens immediately, and that all banks are part of this. There should be no picking and choosing. All banks need to be part of this. We need to have the toughest, most brutal response to the unprovoked brutal war that Russia is carrying out in Ukraine.
Dr. Curry, what is your view of the impact that the sanctions imposed on Moscow so far will have, and whether or not we see the West imposing further sanctions?
I think some of the impacts are easy to see now. If you look at the amount of private jets that are being tracked leaving Russian airspace right now, not only are very wealthy Russians leaving Russia, but they're also going to be taking what money they have with them. The impact of the sanctions will be felt by everyday people in Russia also. And oftentimes people that live in Russia are quick to point out that this isn't our wish, this conflict, this war with Ukraine. There are reports that many people in the country are not even really aware of what's going on. Reports coming out of Ukraine of captured Russian soldiers who are 18, 19 years old are speaking and saying, we had no idea we were coming to invade Ukraine. We thought we were on maneuvers. So as the information is slowly trickling into Russia, bypassing the blockages that the Kremlin has set up on social media, people are leaving. And as with any conflict, it's people with less means that are unfortunately going to be affected the most.
Amanda, would you say that the West underestimated the Russian president when it comes to his moves against Ukraine?
I would say historically there has been a problem of underestimating or appeasing the Russians. I think there's been an extremely serious wake-up call now. We can see the sort of massive support that's now being thrown at Ukraine, and Ukraine absolutely needs this support, and it needs much more of it. So I think everybody is well aware of the huge threat that Ukraine, and not only Ukraine, that the free world is actually under, and more steps need to be taken to push back against the Russians. Russia needs to feel that it's being squeezed dry in terms of its economy, in order to have an impact on what it's doing, or to probably erode the influence that Putin has in Moscow, to get those that support him, who have been siding with him, to start to question his decision making, to start to have cracks in this system.
Dr. Curry, there is also a view that Ukrainians have been left on their own after multiple assurances of support from the West, of solidarity with Ukraine. At this point, what would you say the West could have done differently?
Well, the West could have taken the annexation of Crimea differently 8 years ago in 2014. I have to agree with the other panelists that this has been a historic erring on the side of caution, which is basically just played into the strategy of the Kremlin. You have the situation in Georgia in 2008. You had the annexation of Crimea in 2014. There were minor sanctions, and people really giving Russia continually the benefit of the doubt, saying it couldn't possibly be an imperialistic foreign policy, thinking about the new paradigms of the post-Cold War world. It seems, though, that while the rest of the world shifted away from this Cold War thinking, that the Kremlin stayed on the same course that it had had as the Soviet Union and as Imperial Russia. These foreign policy moves that are happening right now are the same playbook going back 200 years.
I want to take this to both our panelists. First to you, Amanda. Now that Ukraine has agreed to hold talks with Russia, what are your expectations from those discussions?
I mean, Ukraine has agreed to talk. It's going there to listen to what the Russians have to say. I'm not at all optimistic that anything positive will come out of these talks. I mean, Ukraine is not going to accept any of the threats or the demands that the Russians are making. They're not going there to capitulate. They're not going there to give a single centimetre of their territory away, which is what we just heard the foreign minister saying. So let's see what happens. But I think the expectation is that nothing is going to change as a result of this conversation.
Dr. Curry, what are your expectations? How optimistic are you when we look at the Russia-Ukraine talks likely to go ahead at this point?
You know, if you look at the Minsk, you look at any of the talks leading up to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and none of them were successful. I think it's stalling on the part of the Kremlin, but at the same time, Putin invited to these talks without any stipulations. And just yesterday, he was making stipulations about conversations. I don't expect anything to be solved at these talks, but the message that is putting out is that he needs now either to stall, because his delivery lines to his soldiers within Ukraine, logistics are crumbling, and he may be using this to buy time. I don't think these talks will lead to a peaceful solution.
Since you mentioned that, Dr. Curry, what is your assessment of the Russian strategy? Throughout, it has claimed to be prepared for dialogue and it's willing to hold talks, it says, while carrying out this full-scale assault against Ukraine.
Well, intelligence is the ability to recognize patterns, and we have lots of smart people watching this, but they're continually being fooled. Just days ago, there were announcements in the press that Russia is pulling back troops from Belarus, only for that not to happen and then to them to invade. So we need to monitor the situation and what's really happening on the ground. I have to say that most Ukrainian citizens are being very disciplined in terms of sharing information on social media that could affect their troops. But what is coming through has shown that not only is the Ukrainian military been sufficient in holding Russian troops out of some of the major cities, but everyday citizens are participating in keeping the Russians out. There's very high morale, something that the Russian troops are obviously lacking.
Amanda, what do you make of the Russian president's announcement that the country's nuclear deterrence forces are now being put on high alert?
I think that it's an extremely worrying statement that he made. It makes you question, how unhinged has President Putin become. We need to take this seriously, of course. It's just escalating an already perilous situation.
Dr. Curry, do you agree with that? What do you make of this threat now coming in? Is this more of posturing on part of the Russian president? Because we got in an expert just a while ago saying that the countries or any country's forces are always on high alert. And with this move, the Russian leader is only trying to put forth further pressure on Ukraine.
You know, the nuclear option is a tool that's always been left in the toolbox because it leads nowhere good, as we all know. I would like to say this is posturing. However, no one expected Ukraine to be invaded to the extent it was either. And it is extremely worrying. I can only echo my fellow panelists' words here. And this is something that needs to be observed very closely.
Dr. Curry and Amanda, stay on with us, please. Let's also get our viewers a better perspective on what's unfolding as far as the West sanctions against Russia are concerned. Apart from imposing those sweeping sanctions against Russia, Western countries also ordered personal sanctions on the Russian president, his foreign minister, over the invasion of Ukraine. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.